1. Melissa Lucio. Melissa Lucio was a mother of 14. She had survived poverty, addiction, and years of abuse. But in 2008, she was sentenced to die for a crime she still insists she didn't commit: the death of her 2-year-old daughter, Mariah. What began as a tragic accident in a crowded Texas household quickly spiraled into one of the most controversial capital cases in recent American history. It happened in February 2007. Melissa was living in a cramped apartment in Harlingen, Texas, with her husband and a dozen children. Her youngest, Mariah, was a fragile toddler, small for her age and born with physical issues that made walking difficult. Days before the incident, family members claimed she had fallen down a steep staircase. Then, on February 17th, Melissa called 911. Mariah was unresponsive, bruised, limp. She died before she could even reach the hospital. Within hours, police zeroed in on Melissa. Grieving, exhausted, and alone in the interrogation room, she was questioned for over 5 hours. No lawyer, no break, just relentless pressure. And eventually, she gave in. She told investigators, "I guess I did it, I'm responsible." It was those words, vague, defeated, and spoken in a fog of trauma, that would seal her fate. But there was no direct evidence tying Melissa to Mariah's death. No eyewitnesses, no history of violence. The prosecution argued the bruises on Mariah's body were from abuse. The defense said they were consistent with a fall. The state medical examiner claimed the injuries were too extensive to be accidental. Melissa's attorneys argued that the evidence had been misinterpreted and that her confession was coerced by investigators who misunderstood her trauma responses as guilt. Still, in 2008, she was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death. The courtroom didn't hear from expert witnesses about her past abuse. They didn't hear from trauma specialists. And the jury never saw key forensic evidence that would later come to light. For over a decade, Melissa sat on Texas death row, the first Latina woman ever sentenced to die in the state. Her case gained national attention in 2022 when a documentary and a wave of bipartisan support questioned whether she had received a fair trial at all. Even jurors who once voted for her death began speaking out, saying they would have chosen differently if they'd known the full story. Just 2 days before her scheduled execution, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals stepped in.
Is set to be executed by the state of Texas in 2 weeks on April 27th. A state House committee, which is studying how Texas handles death penalty cases, was confused as to why the district attorney would wait when pulling the death warrant would give Lucio, her family, and supporters all over the world peace of mind. The DA says he wants to see what the Criminal Court of Appeals does first. Governor Greg Abbott also waiting to take action to see what the Board of Pardons and Paroles recommends.
They issued a stay, citing new evidence and the possibility that Melissa was, in fact, innocent. In 2024, a judge officially recommended overturning her conviction. That decision is now under review. Today, Melissa Lucio remains behind bars, alive but not yet free. For her children, the trauma runs deep. For her supporters, the fight continues. And for the state of Texas, one question remains unanswered. Did they almost execute an innocent mother? 2. Darlie Routier. On June 6, 1996, the quiet town of Rolette, Texas, woke to a horrifying 911 call. On the line was a young mother, screaming that her 2 sons had been stabbed in the middle of the night. Her name was Darlie Routier, 26 years old, suburban, blonde, and bleeding from her own wounds. But within weeks, that same mother would be arrested and charged with murdering her children. Damon was 5. Devin was 6. Both boys were stabbed multiple times as they slept on the family's living room floor during a sleepover. Darlie told police that she had fallen asleep on the couch next to them. Around 2:30 a.m., she awoke to see a man standing over her, a masked intruder with a knife. She claimed she chased him through the house, out into the garage, cutting herself badly in the process. But by the time she turned back, it was too late. Her boys were dying. At first, the community rallied around her. But things changed quickly. Detectives noticed details they found suspicious. Broken glass from a window scattered the wrong way, blood evidence that didn't match her account, and most damning to many, a video taken just 8 days after the murders. It showed Darlie spraying silly string at her son's gravesite during his birthday celebration. To investigators, it looked like apathy. To her defenders, it was a mother trying to smile through unbearable grief. Prosecutors argued that Darlie killed her sons in a selfish act driven by financial stress and a desire to reclaim her youth and freedom. They claimed she inflicted superficial wounds on herself to stage the scene. During the trial, jurors heard about life insurance policies, diary entries, and conflicting behavior. But they never heard from key defense experts, and they weren't shown photographs of Darlie's severe neck wound, an injury that came within millimeters of her carotid artery. In 1997, she was convicted of capital murder for Damon's death and sentenced to die. Oddly, she was never tried for Devon's murder, even though both boys were killed in the same attack. To this day, that decision raises eyebrows. For more than 25 years, Darlie Routier has maintained her innocence. So have her husband, surviving son, and several jurors who now regret their decision. She remains on death row in Texas, awaiting the results of advanced DNA testing ordered years ago, but delayed repeatedly. Advocates argue that if those results point to an unknown male profile, it could change everything. What makes the Routier case so infamous is not just the brutality of the crime, but the lingering uncertainty. Was Darlie a mother in mourning, or a murderer masking guilt with staged grief? Was justice truly served, or is an innocent woman waiting to die? No one knows for sure, but the clock on her life continues to tick. 3. Christie Michelle Scott. On August 16, 2008, flames tore through a quiet home in Russellville, Alabama. By the time firefighters arrived, the house was engulfed. And inside, lying in the ashes of what used to be his bedroom, was the charred body of 6-year-old Mason Scott. His mother, Christie Michelle Scott, claimed it was a tragic accident, an electrical fire that had spiraled out of control. But investigators saw something else. And what they uncovered turned a grieving mother into a death row inmate. Christie had told police that she'd tucked Mason in around 9:30 that night. She said she woke up to smoke and tried to save him, but couldn't reach him in time. But as investigators sifted through the rubble, the story began to fall apart. The fire, they discovered, had started in multiple places. Accelerants were used, the smoke detectors had been disabled. And the most chilling discovery, Christie had recently taken out multiple life insurance policies on her son, totaling over $100,000. In court, prosecutors painted a picture of cold calculation. They said Christie had lured her autistic son into a room where she had set a fire, knowing his limited mobility and fear of the dark would keep him from escaping. Her motive? Financial desperation. Days before the fire, she had purchased a $5,000 accidental death rider on one of the policies. And just hours before the flames ignited, she made multiple phone calls, including one to confirm that the new policy had taken effect. At trial, Christie's defense argued that the fire could have started accidentally. They claimed she loved her son and had no reason to harm him, but the evidence was overwhelming.
The capital murder trial of Christie Scott has lasted an entire month, and after weeks of being unsure of her fate, as the judge read that she was guilty of capital murder, she showed no emotion.
The most heinous crime in Franklin County history. I mean, there's nothing worse than a mother murdering her son for insurance and because they didn't want him.
Melted accelerant containers found inside the home, inconsistencies in her timeline, and testimony that she had previously asked others about how to start a fire that wouldn't look suspicious. Even more damning, her own husband testified that he believed she had done it. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. In 2009, Christie Michelle Scott was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death. During sentencing, the judge called her crime shockingly evil. She became one of the few women on Alabama's death row, a mother condemned not for snapping in a moment of rage, but for methodically planning her own child's death for a payout. To this day, she maintains her innocence, but her appeals have been denied repeatedly. And for many in Alabama, the image of a mother torching her home with her son inside remains one of the most haunting crimes in the state's history. Mason was just 6 years old. He didn't get to finish first grade, but his name lives on as the victim of a mother who chose fire and money over flesh and blood. 4. Socorro Caro. It was a quiet night in Santa Rosa Valley, California, in the fall of 1999. The house was still. The children were asleep, But what happened next would leave investigators shaken, a community stunned, and a family torn apart in a way that defied comprehension. The mother at the center of it all was 42-year-old Socorro Caro, a woman who had once appeared to be a devoted wife and loving parent. But by the end of that night, 3 of her 4 sons were dead, each shot in the head while they slept in their beds. Socorro's husband, Dr. Xavier Caro, a respected allergist, came home that evening to find the bodies of their sons, ages 5, 8, and 11, lying motionless in their bedrooms. The 4th son had survived a bullet to the head but was left permanently disabled. Socorro was found nearby in the family's minivan with a gunshot wound to her neck. Still breathing, a handgun was in her hand. Authorities say it was a murder-suicide attempt, one that failed. At first, she claimed to have no memory of what happened. She said she had blacked out. Doctors later testified that she had been suffering from severe depression, possibly psychotic at the time of the killings. But prosecutors argued otherwise. They said the crime was cold, calculated, and driven by resentment toward her husband, whom she believed had betrayed her emotionally and financially. The children, they claimed, became pawns in a horrifying act of revenge. What disturbed investigators most was the methodical nature of the killings. Each child had been tucked into bed. There were no signs of struggle, no screams, no calls for help, just the echo of silence and gunfire, one after another. It was as if she had waited until they were safest, asleep, before she pulled the trigger. During the trial, Socorro showed little emotion. Her defense pointed to a long history of untreated mental illness, emotional isolation, and cultural pressure. But the jury wasn't swayed. In 2002, she was convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of attempted murder. The judge sentenced her to death, making her one of the rare women on California's death row. What makes this case even more haunting is what came after. Dr. Xavier Caro, who had once begged for mercy on his wife's behalf, eventually stopped defending her. He filed for divorce, spoke publicly about the pain she caused, and mourned the future his children would never have. Socorro Caro now sits in the Central California Women's Facility. She rarely speaks. She has no public presence, no appeal campaign, no family visits, only silence. The same silence that blanketed her home the night she ended the lives of the boys who once called her mom. 5. Patricia Blackmon. She was supposed to give the child a better life, a home, stability, love. But what 2-year-old Dominique Whitaker received from his adoptive mother was none of those things. Instead, he endured a final night of such brutal violence that even hardened investigators said it was one of the worst cases of child abuse they had ever seen. Patricia Blackmon, a resident of Dothan, Alabama, had legally adopted Dominique, hoping to expand her family and raise a child who needed a second chance. But on the night of May 29, 1999, she called 911 in a panic, claiming the toddler had stopped breathing. Paramedics arrived to find his tiny body covered in bruises, abrasions, and internal injuries. Injuries that told a far more horrifying story than the one Patricia gave. Dominique had suffered more than 30 blunt force injuries. His skull was fractured. His chest had been stomped or struck with enough force to cause internal bleeding. He had bite marks, lash marks, and what appeared to be shoe prints on his skin. Medical examiners said the level of trauma indicated not a single moment of loss of control, but an extended, repeated assault. During police questioning, Patricia changed her story several times. At one point, she claimed Dominique had choked on a popsicle. Then she said he had fallen off the bed. But the evidence spoke louder than her words, and it screamed of rage and cruelty. The child had injuries consistent with being beaten, stomped, and shaken violently before death. Some wounds were fresh, others had started to heal, suggesting long-term abuse. In court, prosecutors argued that Patricia was overwhelmed by parenthood and snapped, but not just once. They said her actions showed a pattern, that Dominique had been living in fear long before the night he died. The defense didn't deny the child's injuries but asked for mercy, citing Patricia's low IQ, her upbringing, and her clean record before adopting Dominique. But for the jury, none of that was enough. In 2000, Patricia Blackmon was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death. Under Alabama law, the murder of a child under the age of 14 qualifies for the death penalty due to the victim's vulnerability. The judge agreed with the jury's recommendation, stating that the cold, calculated, and extended nature of the attack warranted the harshest possible sentence. Patricia has been on Alabama's death row ever since, with all of her appeals denied. She remains one of the longest-serving women on death row in the United States, a woman who was entrusted with the life of a child and instead became the reason that child never made it to preschool. Dominique Whitaker never had a chance to grow up, but his name will never be forgotten, especially by those who believe the one thing a mother, adoptive or not, should never become is a predator. 6. Tierra Capri Gobel. Tierra Capri Gobel was only 21 years old when she was sentenced to death. But what put her on Alabama's death row wasn't a moment of panic or a single mistake. It was the relentless violence inflicted on someone who couldn't speak, couldn't run, and couldn't even lift his head. Her victim? Her own son, a 4-month-old baby named Javante Marquise Johnson. On the surface, Tierra appeared like many young mothers struggling to find their footing, living in Scottsboro, Alabama, and trying to balance relationships, parenting, and survival. But what was happening behind closed doors would reveal itself only after Javante was brought to the emergency room on May 7, 2002. The child was unconscious. His body told the story his voice never could. He had multiple skull fractures, broken ribs, internal injuries, and signs of prolonged physical trauma. Doctors said the injuries were consistent with violent shaking, blunt force trauma, and abuse occurring over a period of time. Despite all efforts, Javante was pronounced dead. Tierra initially claimed she had no idea what had happened. She told doctors and police that her son had suddenly stopped breathing. But as investigators examined the evidence, her story began to crack and then shatter. She eventually admitted that she had become frustrated and had thrown Javante onto a couch. But the autopsy showed far more damage than that. When police interviewed her boyfriend at the time, he too claimed no knowledge of the abuse. But evidence showed both adults had been present during several unexplained injuries in the weeks leading up to the baby's death. Prosecutors argued that Tierra wasn't just negligent, she was violent and willfully cruel. They said she had systematically hurt her son over the course of his short life, and when she finally caused irreversible damage, she tried to cover it with lies. The court heard disturbing testimony about previous bruises, hospital visits, and warning signs that were tragically missed. In 2005, Tierra was convicted of capital murder. The jury unanimously recommended the death penalty, and the judge upheld their decision. During sentencing, the court emphasized the torturous manner in which the infant had suffered, noting that the victim's age and helplessness made the crime especially egregious. Tierra's legal team filed appeals, arguing that she was too young to face death and that mitigating factors, including her mental health and lack of parental support, should spare her life. But the Alabama Supreme Court upheld her sentence, and the U.S. Supreme Court later denied her petition for review. Today, Tierra Capri Gobel sits on Alabama's death row, one of the youngest women ever sentenced to die in the state. Her case is rarely spoken about in the media, overshadowed by others with louder headlines. But for those who knew Javante, the tiny boy who never lived to see his first birthday, the silence is a haunting echo of a life extinguished before it ever had the chance to begin. Number 7. Lisa Leanne Graham. In 2007, police in Phoenix City, Alabama, discovered the body of a teenage girl in a remote wooded area. She had been shot 5 times, twice in the chest, once in the face, and twice in the back of the head. Her name was Stephanie Shea Graham, and she was just 20 years old. But the most horrifying part of the investigation wasn't just who pulled the trigger, it was who planned the entire thing. Her mother, Lisa Leanne Graham. Lisa was well known in her community. A mother of 3, a businesswoman, and by all outward appearances, a provider. But behind the curtain, there was dysfunction, control, and long-standing resentment toward her daughter. Stephanie had struggled with substance abuse and toxic relationships. Their arguments were frequent, but no one imagined those tensions would end with murder. Prosecutors said Lisa had grown tired of Stephanie's lifestyle and considered her an embarrassment. But instead of seeking help or cutting ties, Lisa made a darker decision. She hired a hitman, a man named Kenneth Walton, who had previously worked with her in a business venture. According to testimony, Lisa gave him the gun, gave him instructions, and even drove her daughter to the location where she would be executed. Kenneth later told police that Stephanie suspected something was wrong. She begged her mother not to hurt her. But Lisa stayed silent. She watched as Walton led her daughter into the woods, and she waited in the car as he pulled the trigger. The investigation took years to piece together. Walton was arrested first and cooperated with authorities in exchange for a plea deal. His confession exposed the horrifying truth. Lisa had orchestrated the entire crime. The murder weapon was traced back to her. Cell phone records placed her at the scene, and text messages confirmed the planning. Lisa was arrested and charged with capital murder. At trial, she showed little emotion.
I think it was beautiful. I do.
What do you want to say to Kevin? Just that you love him, right?
Yes.
Is there anything else you want to say?
No, ma'am.
But you felt what he said was beautiful.
Yes.
He doesn't want to lose you.
No, he don't. He's already lost his sister. I don't want him to lose me too.
Her defense argued that Walton acted alone and that Lisa was mentally unwell, suffering from cognitive limitations and depression. But the jury didn't buy it. They were shown a mother who not only arranged her daughter's murder, but ensured it was carried out efficiently and without remorse. In 2015, Lisa Leanne Graham was found guilty and sentenced to death. During the penalty phase, her surviving children begged the court for mercy. Not for themselves, but for a mother they still loved despite what she had done. But the judge upheld the sentence, citing the vile, calculated betrayal of the most sacred human bond. Lisa now sits on Alabama's death row. Her legal team has continued to file appeals, pointing to her IQ level and personal trauma as mitigating factors. But to the court, and to those who remember Stephanie's final words, nothing can erase the fact that her mother stood by and let it happen. She didn't just fail her daughter. She delivered her to death and waited in the car while it happened. They were mothers by blood, by law, by choice. They held newborns in their arms, whispered lullabies, and promised to protect the very lives they helped create. And yet, one by one, they broke that promise in the most devastating way imaginable. They didn't just commit murder, they turned the very concept of motherhood inside out, and in doing so, shocked the conscience of the world. What does it mean when a mother kills? Is it madness? Is it malice? Is it something broken beyond repair, a woman consumed by grief, trauma, addiction, vengeance, or something far colder? We tell ourselves that mothers are sacred, that maternal instinct is unshakable, that no matter how dark the world becomes, a mother will be the last line of defense between a child and harm. But these stories force us to confront a terrifying truth. Sometimes the person a child should fear most is the one who gave them life. From Texas to Alabama, these women were not monsters in the traditional sense. They were not serial killers hiding in shadows or strangers lurking in alleyways. They were the trusted, the familiar, the maternal. And that's what makes their crimes so difficult to understand and impossible to forget. Some claimed innocence, some blamed others, some offered no explanation at all. But in the end, the evidence spoke louder than any denial. Tiny bodies, burned bedrooms, bruises that told stories no child could speak aloud. And in courtrooms across the country, juries looked at mothers women society said should nurture and sentenced them to die. But even a death sentence can't restore what was lost. It can't undo a child's final moments. It can't explain why love was twisted into violence. It can't erase the memory of birthdays never celebrated, first steps never taken, or lullabies that ended in screams. So we ask again, not just as viewers of a documentary, but as people living in a world where these things happen. What does it mean when a mother kills? And more importantly, what happens to the children left behind? Thank you for watching. If this video stayed with you, if it made you feel something, share it, because these children deserve to be remembered. Like it if you believe the truth matters, and subscribe so you don't miss the stories that still need to be told. This isn't entertainment, it's reality, and remembering it is the least we can do.